Hi everyone, David Aragona here for the March 6th edition of Horses to Watch, where we take a look back at horses from the past week, trying to find runners that had countered adversity in their races, prevented from achieving an optimal result, and could be worth betting back in the future, whether it's next time out or down the line, just trying to make some trip notes that could help you enrich your understanding of horses' form as they move on towards their future races. Well, let's take a look back at three races from last week, one from one of three different venues. We've got Gulfstream Park, Aqueduct and Santa Anita on the schedule this week. Let's begin down in South Florida with a race from Saturday, March 2nd. This was the third race on that Fountain of Youth undercard. It's the Colonel Liam Stakes, going a mile for the 3-year-olds on the turf course. And we'll break these runners from the gate, focusing on two runners in this field, the number 7 Royal Majesty and the number 7 Triple Espresso. And before I talk about those two in depth, just watch how this pace develops towards the front end of the pack, because you can see none of the jockeys are particularly intent on showing initiative in this race. Actually, they seem more intent on restraining their horses into the clubhouse turn. And that was despite the fact that there appeared to be plenty of speed on paper. The number 4, Takaya, was a horse who would run all of his best races on the front end. There were two horses coming out of 5-furlong sprint races where they had shown tactical speed, but for whatever reason, none of the jockeys or the instructions to the riders seemed to want to go forward in this race. So the two horses that were really most compromised by this very slow pace developing were the number 7 Royal Majesty, who you see is currently last in this field, buried towards the inside, as well as the number 9 Triple Espresso, who was second to last around the clubhouse turn, does move up a little bit down the backstretch, but you see him there. He is 3 wide in that second flight of runners moving down the backstretch, and you could see him here in the blue and orange cap right in the middle of the pack. He's moving forward on the outside of the horses in very similar silks. That's the number 9 Triple Espresso. And what makes his trip even worse is the fact that he's covering ground while trying to make up position moving into this slow pace, and he's going 3 to 4 wide around the turns. But unfortunately for both of these horses, the leaders just have way too much energy left by the time they get to the top of the stretch for anybody to make much of an impact coming from the back of the pack in this race. The leaders in this race, particularly the winner, Abramar, comes home his final quarter mile in 21.96 seconds, according to the official times of this race. That makes it just impossible for anybody to close into this race. It's actually a credit to the number 7 Royal Majesty for passing a few runners to finish 5th in this race. Triple Espresso also did well through the lane to get up for 4th, despite the fact that he was covering more ground around the turns than that rival. Both of these horses going out for strong barns. Royal Majesty, he is a Bill Mott trainee. Triple Espresso going out for the Todd Pletcher barn. Both of these horses also coming off maiden victories in their prior start. So it seems like they were coming into this race in good form, just were prevented from achieving a competitive result in here, given the way that the pace shook out towards the front end. I was looking at the Time Formulas pace figures for this race. Unsurprisingly, every single fraction is color-coded in blue, indicating that it was an extremely slow pace. The early pace figures for this race in Time Formulas were in the low 60s. That's as slow as you're ever going to see in a conventional dirt route on the turf route, I should say, going this 1 mile distance. So I think both Royal Majesty and Triple Espresso are horses that you would like to follow in a similar spot next time if they get into a race that figures to feature a more competitive pace scenario. Let's move on to a race from Saturday at Aqueduct. This was the Gotham undercard, March 2nd, the second race on this card. It's a starter allowance, $50,000 for horses that had previously run for that tag or lower in a prior start. And let's take a look at the start of this race, going the 2-turn, 9-furlong distance over this very messy, sloppy track on Saturday. And we're going to focus on the number 5, Masterwork, who you can see breaks about a length slowly in this race. And you might recall, Masterwork is a horse that I had previously highlighted on Horses to Watch in his race just prior to this. And this was the first start since I had added him to my Horses to Watch list. And unfortunately, he's back on the list with yet another less than ideal trip in this race. And you can see heading into this clubhouse turn, this is not what you want to see a horse do. Break slowly and then exert energy to rush up to lead the field into the beginning fractions of this race when they're actually setting a legitimately fast pace. And the things I had said about Masterwork in his trip that I had highlighted the previous time was that he had gotten a little bit too keen. He's a horse that might be more comfortable racing on the lead, but also he's a horse that probably wants to go shorter. He had gone the 9 furlongs in his prior race. They entered him back going the 9 furlongs once again. And while he was able to set the pace, which I like, he only did it after breaking behind the field and having to rush past everybody to exert energy to get there. So that's clearly not ideal. And you can see some of the fractions being posted. He went a sub 48 half mile, which over a pretty slow Aqueduct track, especially with the track playing even slower towards the start of this day, having taken so much rain on Gotham Saturday, this is a fast pace. And Ruben Silveira is doing him no favors right here by really pushing the gas to get him to try to open up on this field around the far turn and win it early. But this horse just doesn't really have the stamina to maintain that kind of speed throughout the entirety of a 9 furlong affair. And you're going to see right here, he really hits the wall in the stretch. And he is, believe it or not, going to finish last in this race. Even the horse that's towards the left of your screen is going to pass him by the time they come onto the finish line, because he is just totally gassed by the time they get to the 8th pole here. And you can see he's really shortening stride, just paddling with his legs, not really reaching out. And he is just so tired after exerting so much energy to get to the front end and set those enterprising fractions through the early stages of this race and really set it up for the two horses that were sort of sitting off him, not really contesting that fast pace that he was setting. I do think Masterwork is a lot better than his last couple of results would suggest. Like I said, he got rank in his prior start, not an ideal trip that day. And then once again, not a good trip. I mean, looking at the time formulas pace figures for this race, all color-coded red, the opposite of the first race that I talked about, indicating that this was a race that was fast through almost every fraction. He was setting pace figures of 124 through the opening furlongs. What that indicates, if you're not familiar with the time formulas pace figures, is that Masterwork was on pace to run a speed figure of 124 if he was running even fractions through every step of the way of this race. And he's just not that kind of horse. This race got a 95 final time rating. So clearly he was going way too fast a pace for the class of horse that he is. And I think if he can finally get into a race where he's able to relax a little bit more, whether it's towards the front end or stalking in the clear, and potentially going a little bit shorter, a one-turn race, maybe 7 furlongs to a mile, I think we're going to see a much better result from Masterwork in his next race. Let's finish up with a race from Santa Anita. This is from their Sunday card, March 3rd, the 9th race on the card. It's an allowance N1X going 6.5 furlongs down the hill on their turf course for fillies and mares. And we'll break these runners from the gate, focusing on the number 1, Real Fire. Now, if you're not familiar with Real Fire, she can be a really difficult horse to ride, and we're going to see some of that here. And I think one thing that makes it especially difficult to ride Real Fire is when she's raced down the hill, because for whatever reason, this mare just does not seem to react well to building up the kind of momentum that these horses do racing on this downhill course, and she almost always has trouble with the dirt crossing. If you look at her prior form in her PPs, the comment is consistent in her downhill races, has trouble crossing the dirt, bears out crossing the dirt, and you're going to see it once again here. But watch the body language of her jockey, Umberto Rispoli, towards the back of the pack on the number 1 horse. He's not able to ride her. He's actually restraining her, sort of anticipating what's going to happen as she comes down this steep downhill portion towards that dirt crossing. And right here, she's trying to bear out. He's trying to prevent her from running up on horse's heels, not really able to ride her. Coming into the stretch here, she's wanted to build up momentum to run up into traffic, and he's trying to prevent her from doing so. But now's the point in the race when you want to be asking the horse for the best to actually pass horses in front of her, and he's just not really able to do that. He ankles her to the outside right here and gives her one token smack of the whip there, but really after that just wraps up on her, realizing he's not going to get into the trifecta or superfecta. And she actually is responding well to that encouragement, quickly passing horses across the wire. But it seemed like Umberto Rispoli was just sort of riding this horse to stay on her, to keep a lid on her for most of the race, and was never really able to get in the mindset of trying to achieve a competitive result in this race, given the fact that I think he might be familiar with what this horse might do coming on that downhill course. She does have talent. We've seen her be successful sprinting on the turf before, more so on the flat course at Santa Anita or elsewhere, not coming down the hill. But I am intrigued to see what would happen with a horse like this if they would stretch her out in distance, maybe try the 2-turn mile again. She's only done it once before in her career. She's a horse who's raced 20 times. She's 3 for 20 lifetime as a 5-year-old. But the one time they tried to go longer with her, it was her first start against winners, and she was breaking from post 12, had to go a little too fast towards towards the front end and got tired. But I don't think that that one result should say that she can't go a little bit longer, because she just seems like the kind of horse that wants to be a bit more forwardly placed, and maybe she would get the chance to do so if they were able to run her in a longer race that just naturally features a slower early pace. Because this mare does have real talent, but she just can be a really tricky horse to ride. And I think coming down the hill just makes her antics even worse and more difficult for jockeys to manage. So I think this horse has talent. We saw it in the way that she was finishing that race, even with very little encouragement. And she's one that's going to be a big price next time, given her overall record and the problems that she's had in the past. But I do think she has the talent to break through at this level if her connections can figure out the right kind of spot and ride for her. Well, those are all the horses to watch this week. If you want to follow the runners that I highlighted moving forward, you can add them to your horse watch under your DRF.com account. Just put them on your list and you'll get email notifications when these horses run back in the future. You can also go into your DRF Formulator or Timeform US accounts on your subscriptions and add notes in the notes feature in the charts of both of those past performance sets. And you'll see your notes about these horses' trips show up in the running lines of the past performances when these horses come back in the future. But that doesn't mean you just have to focus on the horses that I highlighted on this show. You can watch your own trips. Remember, the observations and notes that you make through watching trips for yourself are among the most valuable observations that you can make as a horse player. So hopefully watching Horses to Watch has helped you develop those race watching skills. Everyone, thanks for tuning in to Horses to Watch this week.